Labour-led House and Senate. Well, there's been news this week that there's been a more than 30% increase in the number of inquiries related to debt counselling compared with the same period last year. This is according to the DebtBusters third quarter debt index, which reveals that most of the inquiries are from consumers who were first-time buyers of assets, while his interest rates were at historical lows before November last year. Joined now by Benay Sager, head of DebtBusters. Benay, good afternoon to you. We all remember when interest rates literally dropped to historic lows during the pandemic. Many people bought their first homes. What's happened to them since then?
Yeah, Stephen, it's a good question to ask. And I think what we see is that the impact of the twin eyes, as we call them, one is inflation and the other one is interest rates. So a lot of the consumers who actually borrowed for an asset to acquire an asset between early 2020 and late 2021 managed to do so at really historical low interest rates. And at that time, they probably had very little room in terms of increasing that interest rates, in terms of being able to service that debt. And that interest rates have gone up significantly, as you know. And on top of that, inflation as well is at probably 10-year high. So as a result, I think consumers are feeling squeezed on both ends in terms of servicing their debt, as well as being able to keep up with the basic necessities when it comes to inflation. And we see a lot of consumers who what we would call first-time asset borrowers or asset financiers coming to us in the last few months.
I suppose we kind of knew that the pandemic would probably end and that interest rates would go back up. I think what's caught most people by surprise is inflation. Has that been the big variable here? That's what's put people under so much pressure?
I think it depends on the income groups. So in our debt index, we look at different income groups. I think certainly for the lower income groups, inflation is a bigger worry. And you know, it hits very hard and very quickly, especially as we know the necessities, even though official inflation ratio is in the single digits still. If you think about the price of petrol, the price of electricity and transport and bread and all the essentials that have gone up significantly more than the inflation in the last 2 years. And we're seeing compounded effect of that at the lower income levels. And at the mid to high income levels, we are seeing the much bigger impact of the interest rates. And I think where people got caught, and it's not necessarily their fault, is that their incomes haven't also increased over the last several years. So if you are a consumer, you're looking at a situation where your income probably hasn't gone up much in the last few years. Then you have the compounded interest impact of the last 5 to 6 years of somewhere between 30 to 35%. So you are feeling like you're taking home less. And the reality is you probably are. And on top of that, if you have debt to service, those interest rates have also gone up. So you may have had very little room to begin with, and now you have actually no room.
So when people come to you, I mean, what do? They've got no room to move in. I mean, literally, if you look at food prices, some of them have gone up so high that actually people are battling to keep their house and keep food on the table. Difficult choices to make.
Yeah, indeed. And I think where we always start with, Stephen, in the DebtBusters, we ask people, you know, what can you actually afford to pay towards your debt repayments? And I think establishing that affordability in such a way that also satisfies the lenders or credit providers is quite crucial. And often what we find is that people generally need about 2/3 of their take-home pay to pay for the basic necessities. And we generally try to build a repayment program in terms of their debt repayments over a longer period, by essentially saying, okay, you know what, they can probably contribute somewhere between 25 to 40% of their take-home pay in terms of that debt repayment. And in doing so, they also retain their assets and they don't have to really make those tough choices as you're talking about.
I do wonder, I mean, if it was foreseeable that interest rates would one day go up and people were given loans, the people who gave them the loans, and I'm talking about the banks now, they must have known that this could happen and that this would put people under really intense pressure.
Yeah, the thing is, I think most of the home, you know, when we look at the different types of debt that people come to us with, about half of it is what we call unsecured debt. So credit cards, personal loans, and so on. And generally, those come with fixed interest rates. So let's say somewhere between 18 to 25% is what you sign up on the day you take out the loan. And that's what you end up paying regardless of what happens to interest rates over the long period, whether they go up or down, that doesn't really change. But the other half of the debt is linked to assets, which is cars and bonds there, pretty much every single agreement these days that you would sign as a consumer is linked to the variability of the repo rate. So whenever the Reserve Bank changes, you feel the impact literally the next day in terms of the repayment. And I think that's the part that is quite difficult to really cater for. And I think, what we always tell consumers is, be aware of, be fully understanding of what you are signing up to in terms of interest rates and the repayment amounts, and be very careful that you actually build a bit of a buffer for yourself when you're taking out these loans because of the different nature of the different types of loans.
It's obviously everybody needs a house to live in, and for a lot of people, once you get on the property market, that can really change your finances for the better over the longer term, possibly for your children as well. You have an asset. Cars, of course, a lot of people borrow money to buy a car, and no asset depreciates as quickly as a car does. Is your advice for people to maybe be a bit more careful about the cars that they buy, the amount and where they're spending their money?
Yeah, this is a very hotly contested topic, I should say. I think what you say is partly true in the sense that the car itself isn't going to sell for more than what you bought it for. That's for sure. But often where people, I think, also struggle is they're not owning the cars, but they're actually getting into long-term rental agreements or, with large balloon payments at the end. And I think that's where it becomes really, really difficult. I think we fully understand that people need a way of reliable transport to make money. Often that's why people either buy or, borrow money to essentially be able to pay for a car. We totally get that. At the same time, I think what we tell people is understand what your balloon payment is going to be if you are going to have one. Make sure that you're going to have money in the end to pay for that. And often I think that's where consumers fall short. And the value of the car on the day that you return it may be far less than what you actually owe on that day, and you still have to pay that money back. So I think there's quite a bit of work to do in terms of making sure consumers fully understand when it comes to vehicles that they should really pick something that they're going to be able to pay for in the end, come 4 or 5 or 6 years down the line. And it's something that actually serves their basic needs to make sure that they can get to their work and take their children to school and all of that.
Benay, you've been talking about coming off historic lows in terms of interest rates. We know from what the Reserve Bank governor has said, we know from our inflation figures and from global inflation figures that interest rates are going to go up more. I don't see people's incomes going up more. Are you expecting the situation to actually get worse for most people?
I think that is our expectation. I think we just seeing the beginning of quite hard times for South African consumer. And I think we also need to recognize, this is a long-term struggle in the sense that, all the way back from 2015, 2016, the growth in individual salaries started to slow down. And then now it's actually, there isn't much of a growth. And as you say, interest rates are expected to be increased for a while longer still. And, with regards to inflation, I think the expectation there is maybe after the end of this year, it tapers off a little bit. But I think the consumer is certainly going to be under quite a bit of pressure for the next, let's call it 6 to 18 months. And I think that's where we urge consumers to really understand what they're paying towards and treat their debt repayments as something that it can be restructured. Don't treat it as something that is not touchable. And I think that's where debt counseling comes in really handy. Have the conversation with someone who can actually advise you properly, a registered debt counselor. They can tell you whether this is the right program for you, but at least know that you have the options in terms of being able to repay back these loans.
Benay Sager, thank you. Head of DebtBusters, really do appreciate it. Very tough times for so many people at the moment. Let's have a quick look at the markets.